It'd be very odd if we had the internet, all the transformative technologies that the internet brings together, but we continue to use 1970s technology like credit cards and bank accounts and fiat currency as if nothing had changed. The idea that that legacy system will still be the dominant system of payment 5 or 10 years from now seems highly implausible to me. And yet, for many people, the TradFi people, that's actually their base case. What the world is just going to stay with 1970s payments and money.
One of your books, which I think has affected me the most, is The Ascent of Money. And I read it a long time ago. And then during the pandemic, I went back and reread it. And I appreciate, I actually have a signed copy from you from back in the day when you came to the SALT conference. I haven't seen the PBS documentary on The Ascent of Money, but in my second reading of The Ascent of Money, it fortified my position related to Bitcoin. And I'm going to explain to why in 30 seconds. I want you to react to it. Tell me I'm either nuts to own Bitcoin, or maybe I got something out of your book, which makes sense. But when you took us through the arc of the history of money, my synopsis of it from your book was it's ultimately a technology that we're using with each other in lieu of bartering. And this technology has transformed itself over the years. But at the end of the day, it's effectively a ledger. You know, it's an asset and liability ledger. If I have the money, you're going to perform a good or service for me. It comes out of my account. It goes into your account. When you stop and think about Bitcoin, of all the things that have been created, for me, it is the most technologically sanctified, technologically pure, incorruptible, due to the decentralized properties of it and the blockchain, incorruptible ledger. You and I both know, we're going to get to inflation in a second, that governments can corrupt our current ledger, but Bitcoin seems to be uncorruptible. It's just challenged by the uncertainty of the technology and the early stages of its adoption. What did I get wrong? I mean, if I got it wrong, feel free to blast me on 𝗕liche FM, because that always makes a better podcast. But what did I get right or wrong?
I'm not going to blast you. I think that's about right. In fact, I updated The Ascent of Money on its 10th anniversary in 2018, and I added a chapter which dealt with crypto and specifically with Bitcoin. And I'll put it this way. You're right that the history of money is essentially a whole bunch of different ways to make the relationship between debtors and creditors efficient, more efficient than barter. And coins and banknotes were just the technology of the time. Banknotes didn't make sense until the cost of making paper went well down. In the same way, at each stage in the history of finance broadly, there has been evolution, taking advantage of new technology, usually to make payments easier, more dependable, less falsifiable. What was really rare prior to 2008, when Satoshi publishes the paper, was a form of payment that didn't require some third-party verification. The reason banks became such dominant institutions from the time of the 𝗕ecie right down to the present was that transactions, in order for there not to be fraud, in order for money not to be stolen or payments not to be made multiple times, you need banks. And in addition to banks, you often, but not always, need the role of the state. A lot of money bears at least the imprint of the state. There were payment systems that didn't require banks or the state in the past. Bills of exchange, which arose after the Black Death as a way for merchants to finance long-distance trade, are the nearest thing to peer-to-peer payments without third-party verification. But apart from bills of exchange, we really don't see it. Bitcoin makes it possible for there to be peer-to-peer transactions without third-party verification. It also guarantees that the supply of Bitcoin is finite. And in that sense, it has some resemblance to digital gold. But I prefer my friend Matt McLennan's definition, which is that Bitcoin is an option on digital gold, because in the end, for it to work, we really need the whole transition to a new system of online finance to work. And until we all are sure that it's going to work for the long term and isn't just an experiment that unravels, there's an optionality going on here, which explains the volatility of the price. Part of what's going on here is there's a process of adoption where with every passing month, a higher proportion of the world's millionaires and institutions hold some Bitcoin. But there's also this uncertainty. Oh my goodness, could it all fall apart? Which I think is part of what's driving the volatility that we see even today. As you know, Anthony, the day we're talking, Bitcoin's down, 5%? That's nothing, by the way, for an option on digital gold. But your basic take is right. It would be very odd. Let me turn it around. It would be very odd if we had the internet, all the transformative technologies that the internet brings together, but we continue to use 1970s technology like credit cards and bank accounts and fiat currency as if nothing had changed. The idea that that legacy system will still be the dominant system of payment 5 or 10 years from now seems highly implausible to me. And yet, for many people, the TradFi people, that's actually their base case. What the world is just going to stay with 1970s payments and money, even although everything else, including e-commerce, has arrived.
Well, because I also read your Warburg book and the Rothschild book. You know, it actually, the payment rail system that we're operating on is really from the 1920s. It was developed right after the introduction of the U.S. Federal Reserve. Your 1970s would be the Fed wire. But yes, you're correct in all of that. I mean, my point being is you're confirming what I believe. So
yeah, we're agreeing here. But, you know, I think what's interesting about the 70s is that's when the peg to gold is gone. So 71, you basically go to straight fiat currencies. It's also the time when credit cards start to be adopted. So I think, broadly speaking, we have a lot of 1970s technology. SWIFT is a good example where, you know, interbank payments are still going through a 1970s system. I just don't find it plausible that that is going to stay the same when there are superior ways of transacting online.
So, you know, I appreciate you answering the question. And just to make you laugh, if we did this podcast in the morning, Bitcoin was up 2.2%. We're now doing the podcast in the afternoon. Bitcoin's down 4.3. We've had a 7% swing today, which to me is a casual day in Bitcoin, at least for now, until it gets more adopted.
But remember when my son, who was then I think 15, first said to me, "Dad, you should really look at this thing called Bitcoin." He's now 22. Bitcoin, when he mentioned that, was at $300. Well, we're now just kind of oscillating and have been for some weeks around $30,000. So my son will never let me forget that I was dismissive back then when I should just have been right in there and buying as much as I could.
See what we do to our dads, because I had the opportunity to buy a Superman, an Action Comic #1 for $500. It's worth $5 million today. Of course, that was 50 years ago when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I had $300 saved up. My father wouldn't give me the extra 200. But, you know, such is life, you know.
Listen to your kids is a good rule for investing.
Sometimes it's a good thing. All right. Well,
not always, but yeah, they're often onto the things that you're a bit too old to see.